Commander Vesserani stood at the observation deck of Way Station Ulrich 7 and watched the ships come and go, like metal insects buzzing through the endless dark of space. He was tall by the standards of his species, the Keldrith, standing nearly 8 feet with thick blue-gray skin that looked like armor plating and forearms that ended in claws sharp enough to cut through steel cables without much effort at all. The Keldrith were hunters by nature and slavers by choice, and Veth had made himself rich by taking what he wanted from whoever was too weak to stop him. Way Station Ulrich 7 was perfect for his kind of business because there was no real law here. Just the simple rule that the strong take from the weak, and the weak learn to stay out of the way or suffer for their stupidity. Veth had been working this station for 15 cycles now and had taken hundreds of beings from dozens of species to sell in the outer reach markets where wealthy collectors paid premium prices for exotic slaves. His reputation was fearsome and well-earned because he had never failed to capture a target, and he had never shown mercy to anyone who tried to resist him. Today he stood with his 2 most trusted lieutenants, Krath and Morval, both Keldrith, like himself, but smaller and less ambitious, content to follow his orders and take their share of the profits without complaint. "What are we looking for today, Commander?" Krath asked in a low, rumbling voice that sounded like rocks grinding together. Veth did not answer right away because he was watching a small cargo hauler drift toward the station's docking port with smoke trailing from one of its engine pods. The ship was clearly damaged and clearly desperate, which meant whoever was aboard would be vulnerable and probably alone. "That one," Veth said, pointing with one of his forearms at the wounded vessel. "Let us see what fortune has delivered to us today." The ship's registration came up on his optical implant as he focused his enhanced vision on the hull markings, and what he saw made him smile with all 3 rows of his sharp teeth. The vessel was called the Persistence, and it was registered to Earth, that strange wet planet on the far side of the galaxy that had only recently joined the greater galactic community. Veth had heard stories about Earthborn humans, but had never actually seen one in person until now. The story said humans were dangerous, that they came from something called a death world, where everything tried to kill everything else all the time. But Veth found this hard to believe. He had seen images of humans, and they looked so soft and fragile with their thin skin, and their dull teeth, and their complete lack of claws or venom, or natural weapons of any kind. How could such weak creatures be dangerous when a single Keldrith child could tear one apart with minimal effort? "Humans," Morval said with a snort of contempt. "I have heard they taste terrible and break too easily to be worth much as labor slaves." "But they are rare in this sector," Veth replied with growing interest. "And rare means valuable to the right buyer, especially if the human is female, because the collectors in the outer reach pay extra for exotic females of any species." They watched as the damaged ship completed its docking procedure with obvious difficulty, the pilot clearly struggling to compensate for the failing engine. When the airlock finally opened and the pilot stepped out onto the station's deck, Veth felt his confidence grow even stronger. The human was female, just as he had hoped, small and slight with dark hair pulled back from a face that looked young and frightened. She wore simple work clothes stained with engine grease, and she carried a small bag of tools over one shoulder as she looked around the station with wide, nervous eyes. Her name, according to the ship's registration, was Mira Chun, and she was listed as the sole crew member of the Persistence, which meant she was completely alone with no one to protect her or call for help. Veth watched her walk through the station with her head down and her shoulders hunched, moving quickly past groups of larger aliens and avoiding eye contact with everyone she encountered. This was prey behavior, the kind of body language that Veth had learned to recognize after years of hunting sentient beings across dozens of star systems. She was afraid, and fear made prey stupid and slow and easy to catch. Mira made her way to the station's repair shop, where she spoke with the Russian mechanic in a soft voice that Veth could barely hear even with his enhanced audio implants. She was trying to negotiate a fair price for engine parts, but the mechanic could smell her desperation and was charging her triple the normal rate. Veth smiled again as he watched her count out her credits with careful, worried movements, clearly calculating how much she could afford and how much she would have left for food and fuel. After she finished her business at the repair shop, Mira walked to the station's cantina and found a small table in the darkest corner of the room. She ordered the cheapest meal on the menu and ate alone with her back pressed against the wall and her eyes constantly scanning the room for threats. "She knows she is in danger," Krath observed. "Look how scared she is." "Good," Veth replied. "Fear will make her cooperative when we take her, and cooperation will make transport easier." He spent the next several hours watching the human from a distance, learning her patterns and her habits and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She returned to her ship twice to work on repairs, struggling with heavy equipment that seemed almost too big for her small frame to handle. She ate 2 more meals in the cantina, always in the same dark corner, always watching the room with those nervous, frightened eyes. She spoke to almost no one and kept her interactions as brief as possible, clearly eager to finish her repairs and leave this dangerous station behind. As the station's artificial lights dimmed to signal the start of the night cycle, Veth gathered his lieutenants and moved into position. The human would have to walk through a long, empty corridor to reach her ship, and that corridor would be the perfect place to grab her without witnesses. "Remember," Veth told his men, "we take her alive and undamaged because damaged goods sell for less. She is small and weak, so this should require minimal effort on our part." Krath and Morval nodded their understanding and drew their weapons just in case the human tried to run. Veth did not bother to arm himself because he did not believe he would need a weapon against such a tiny, fragile creature. This would be the easiest capture of his entire career, and by morning he would be on his way to the outer reach with a valuable piece of exotic cargo in his hold. Or so he believed. Mara Chen walked through the dimly lit corridor of Way Station, Ulrich 7, with her heart beating fast inside her chest and her hands shaking slightly at her sides. She had known from the moment she docked at this station that she was in terrible danger. But her damaged engine had given her no other choice because the nearest safe port was 3 days away, and she would never have made it that far. Every instinct she possessed had been screaming at her to stay alert and stay careful and get off this station as fast as humanly possible. She had grown up on Earth in a small town in northern China where her grandmother had taught her many things, including the most important lesson of all. When you are small and the world is full of things that want to hurt you, you must learn to protect yourself because no one else will do it for you. Her grandmother had been a tiny woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she had trained in martial arts for 60 years, and she had taught Myra everything she knew. The tiger does not show its claws until it is ready to strike, her grandmother used to say. Let your enemies think you are weak, and they will lower their guard. So Myra had kept her head down, and her eyes nervous, and her shoulders hunched like a frightened prey animal because she had noticed the big blue-gray alien watching her from the moment she stepped off her ship. She had seen the cruel intelligence in his eyes and the confident way he moved, and she had known exactly what he was thinking. He thought she was weak and helpless and easy to take. He thought she was prey. But Mira Chun was not prey, and the alien was about to learn why humans had survived on a planet where everything from the weather to the wildlife seemed designed to kill them. She was halfway through the corridor when 3 figures stepped out of the shadows and blocked her path. The big one was in front, the one who had been watching her all day, and his 2 companions flanked him on either side with weapons drawn and cruel smiles on their alien faces. Earthborn female, the big one said in a voice that buzzed through some kind of translation device. Do you know who I am? Myra stopped walking and let her body language stay small and frightened, even though every muscle in her body was tensing for action. "No," she said in a quiet, trembling voice that was only partly an act. "Please, I do not want any trouble." "I am Commander Veth Surani," the alien said with obvious pride. "And you should feel honored because Earthborn females fetch premium prices in the outer reach markets, and I have chosen you to be my next piece of valuable cargo." Myra's heart was pounding so hard now that she could hear it in her ears like a drum. She had trained for moments like this her entire life, but training was not the same as reality. And reality was 3 huge aliens with weapons who wanted to kidnap her and sell her as a slave. "Please," she said again, letting her voice crack with fear. "I have credits. I can pay you. Just let me go back to my ship." Veth laughed at her words, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed off the metal walls of the corridor. "Your credits mean nothing to me, little human. You will come with us now, and if you cooperate, you will not be harmed before sail." He moved toward her with terrifying speed, all 4 of his arms reaching out to grab her. Mira tried to dodge to the left, but he was faster than she expected, and one of his clawed hands closed around her upper arm with crushing force. The pain was immediate and intense, his claws digging into her flesh through her thin work clothes. "Got you," Veth said with satisfaction as he pulled her toward him. "You see how easy this is? You humans are even weaker than the stories suggest." His grip tightened, and Mira felt something shift inside her brain, something old and primal that her species had carried in their genes for 100,000 years. It was the survival instinct that had allowed her ancestors to hunt mammoths and fight off saber-toothed cats and spread across every corner of a deadly planet. It was the thing that made humans so dangerous that even the deadliest predators on Earth had learned to fear them. It was the fire that burned in the heart of every Earthborn human, waiting for the moment when flight became impossible and only fight remained. Mira stopped struggling and went very still. Very still. Veth noticed the change and frowned slightly, confused by her sudden calm. "What is wrong with you, creature? Have you accepted your fate already?" Mira looked up at him, and he saw that her eyes had changed. The fear was gone, replaced by something cold and hard and utterly focused. "No," she said in a voice that no longer trembled. "I have not accepted anything." Her free hand moved faster than Veth could track, shooting upward in a palm heel strike that connected with his throat right below his jaw. The Keldrith throat was armored with thick scales on the outside, but the internal structures were softer, and Mira hit him with every ounce of strength she possessed. Veth made a choking sound, and his grip on her arm loosened just slightly. It was enough. Mira rotated her trapped arm in a circular motion, a technique her grandmother had taught her called the breakaway, that used physics and leverage to escape even the strongest grip. Veth's claws tore shallow furrows in her skin as her arm slipped free, but she barely felt the pain because her body was flooded with adrenaline, the chemical that had helped her species survive impossible odds for thousands of generations. She did not run because running would put her back to armed enemies, and that was a death sentence. Instead, she stepped closer to Veth, inside his reach where his long arms were less useful. He was still choking from the throat strike, still trying to understand what was happening when Mira chose her next target. The Keldrith had strong armor-like skin, but their joints were vulnerable, especially the knees, which bent backward like a bird's leg and were held together by complex arrangements of cartilage and tendon. Mira had learned anatomy from her grandmother and had studied dozens of alien species since leaving Earth, because knowledge was a weapon that weighed nothing and cost nothing to carry. She kicked with her right leg, driving her heel into the side of Veth's left knee with all the power she could generate from her hips and core. The sound it made was horrible, like someone breaking a thick branch over their knee, but wetter and more organic. Veth screamed in a frequency so high that Mira could barely hear it. A sound of pure agony that made his two lieutenants freeze in shock. His leg bent sideways at an angle that legs were never meant to bend. He fell. The mighty commander Veth Serani, terror of Way Station RX-7 and slayer of 100 species, collapsed onto the metal floor with his ruined leg twisting beneath him. Mira stood over him, breathing hard, trembling with adrenaline, blood dripping from the wounds on her arm. The two lieutenants stared at her with expressions of pure disbelief. "Who wants to be next?" Mira asked, and her voice was steady, even though her whole body was shaking. They did not answer. They did not move. They had just watched a tiny soft creature destroy their unbeatable commander in less than 5 seconds. And now they understood why the stories about Earthborn humans called them Deathworlders. The corridor echoed with the sound of running footsteps and shouting, voices as station security finally responded to the commotion. 6 armed guards in heavy armor came around the corner with their weapons raised, and their eyes scanning for threats. They found Veth writhing on the floor in a growing pool of purple blood. They found Krath and Morval standing frozen with their weapons still in their hands. And they found Myra Chun, the small human female, standing in the middle of it all with blood running down her arm and a look on her face that made even the hardened security officers hesitate before approaching. What happened here? The lead guard demanded in a harsh electronic voice. Mira forced herself to breathe slowly and steadily as the adrenaline continued to surge through her body. Her hands were shaking and her heart was racing, and part of her brain was screaming that she needed to run and hide and find safety. But another part of her brain, the cold logical part that her grandmother had trained her to access in moments of crisis, told her that running would be the worst possible choice. "Self-defense," Mira said in a clear, steady voice. "These 3 cornered me in the corridor and announced their intention to kidnap me and sell me as a slave in the outer reach." The security officer looked at Veth's ruined leg, and then looked at the 2 armed Keldrith, and then looked at the tiny, human woman who barely came up to his chest. "Is this true?" he asked Krath and Morval. The 2 lieutenants exchanged glances but said nothing. What could they say? If they admitted the truth, they would confirm that they had attempted to commit a crime against another station visitor. If they lied and claimed the human had attacked them without provocation, no one would believe them, because how could such a small creature attack 3 armed Keldrith warriors? Their silence was answer enough. "Scan the corridor," the security officer ordered one of his subordinates. "Check for recording devices." The subordinate pulled out a handheld scanner and swept it across the walls until he found what he was looking for. "There is a security camera 20 meters back," he reported. "It should have captured everything." "Pull the footage," the lead officer commanded. A few minutes later, they were all watching a holographic replay of the encounter. The footage showed Veth and his lieutenants stepping out of the shadows to block the human's path. It showed Veth grabbing the human by the arm while his men pointed weapons at her. It showed everything that happened next. Though even watching it a second time, the security officers found it hard to believe what their eyes were telling them. The human had been grabbed by a Keldrith commander, nearly 3 times her size, and she had escaped and crippled him in less than 5 seconds. "Self-defense," the lead officer said, with something that might have been respect in his voice. "The footage is clear. The human acted only to protect herself from an attempted kidnapping." Veth tried to speak, but his voice came out as a strangled croak because his throat was still damaged from the palm strike. "Get him to the medical bay," the security officer ordered, "and confiscate the weapons from his companions. They will face charges for attempted kidnapping and will be banned from the station." "What about me?" Myra asked. The security officer looked at her for a long moment before answering. "You are free to go, human. Under station law, you committed no crime. You simply defended yourself against attackers. But I would suggest you complete your repairs quickly and leave as soon as possible, because Commander Sorani has friends on this station who may want revenge. Mira nodded and watched as the security officers lifted Veth onto a stretcher and carried him away. His lieutenants were led off in restraints, and soon the corridor was empty except for Mira and the purple blood that stained the metal floor. She stood there for several minutes, alone with the aftermath of what she had done. The adrenaline was fading now, and the shaking was getting worse. Her arm throbbed where Veth's claws had torn her skin, and she knew she needed to clean and bandage the wounds before infection set in. But first, she just needed to breathe. She leaned against the corridor wall and closed her eyes and remembered her grandmother's voice from so many years ago. When the fight is over, let yourself feel everything you pushed aside during the battle. The fear and the anger and the sadness, let them flow through you and then let them go. This is how warriors stay sane in a world full of violence. Mira felt tears prickling at her eyes, and she let them fall. She cried for the fear she had felt when Veth grabbed her arm. She cried for the violence she had been forced to commit. She cried because the galaxy was so big and so cruel, and she was so far from home, and there was no one to protect her except herself. When the tears stopped, she took a deep breath and pushed herself off the wall and walked to the medical bay to get her arm treated. The Veshan physician who examined her wounds was the same one who had been assigned to treat Veth. "You are the human who did that?" The Veshan asked with obvious curiosity as they cleaned and bandaged Myra's arm. "Yes," Myra said quietly. The Veshan had 4 arms and used 2 of them to apply medication while the other 2 prepared fresh bandages. "I have been practicing medicine for 90 cycles, and I've never seen a joint destroyed so completely by an unarmed strike. Whatever you did to him, his leg will never function properly again." Myra felt a strange mix of emotions at this news. Part of her was horrified that she had permanently maimed another living being. Part of her was grimly satisfied that a slaver who had hurt countless innocent people would never hunt again. "Will he walk?" she asked. "With assistance," the Veshan replied. "He will need a hover chair for the rest of his life, or perhaps a cybernetic replacement, but he will never walk on his own 2 legs again." The physician finished bandaging Myra's arm and looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "I treated many of his victims over the years, you know? The ones he brought through this station on their way to the slave markets. I could never do anything to help them except patch up their injuries before they were sold." The Veshan paused, and their voice grew softer. "So I want you to know that whatever guilt you may be feeling about what you did, there are many beings across this galaxy who would thank you if they could." Mira did not know how to respond to this, so she simply nodded and thanked the physician for treating her wounds. As she walked back through the station toward her ship, she noticed something strange. People were looking at her differently now. The aliens who had ignored her or sneered at her before were stepping aside to let her pass. The predators who had watched her with hungry eyes were now avoiding her gaze entirely. Word had spread through the station with amazing speed, as gossip always does in small enclosed communities. Everyone knew what had happened in that corridor. Everyone knew what the tiny human woman had done to the fearsome Commander Veth Sorani. And everyone was very, very careful not to give her any reason to do it again. Veth Sorani woke up in the medical bay with pain radiating through his entire body and a terrible weight pressing down on his soul. For a moment, he did not remember what had happened. Then the memories came flooding back. The human woman in the corridor, the grab, the strike to his throat, and then the impossible, terrible sensation of his leg being destroyed by a single kick from a creature half his size. He tried to sit up, but a mechanical arm pushed him gently back down onto the bed. "Do not move," a voice said. "The surgery took 14 hours, and your body needs time to heal." Veth turned his head and saw the Veshan physician standing beside his bed with a medical tablet in 2 of their 4 hands. My leg, Veth croaked through his damaged throat. Fix my leg. The physician's expression was carefully neutral, but Veth could see something in their eyes that looked almost like satisfaction. Your leg cannot be fixed, Commander. The human destroyed the joint completely, shattering the cartilage and severing the nerve clusters that control motor function. We were able to save the limb itself, but you will never walk on it again without mechanical assistance. Veth felt the words hit him like physical blows. Never walk again? He was a Keldrith warrior, a hunter, a predator who had spent his entire life taking what he wanted through strength and speed and violence. How could he be a hunter if he could not even walk? There must be something you can do, he demanded. Cybernetic replacement, regeneration therapy, anything. Cybernetic replacement is possible, but expensive, the physician replied. Far more expensive than your current finances can afford, especially since your ship and assets have been seized by station authorities as compensation for your attempted crime. Veth stared at the physician in disbelief. Seized? They cannot seize my property. I am Commander Veth Sarani. You are Commander Veth Sarani, the physician corrected. Now you are simply a crippled criminal who has been banned from Waystation, Ulrich 7, and whose reputation has been destroyed across half the sector. They held up their tablet and showed him a news feed that was spreading across the local communication networks. The headline read, Keldrith slaver crippled by unarmed human female. Below the headline was security footage of the fight, played on loop, showing over and over again how easily the tiny human had escaped his grip and destroyed his leg. This footage has been viewed over 2 million times in the last 6 hours, the physician said with that same neutral tone that barely hid their pleasure. By tomorrow, it will have spread to every station and settlement in the sector, and by next week, it will have reached the outer reach markets where you used to sell your victims. Veth felt something cold and terrible growing in his chest. It was fear, an emotion he had not felt since he was a hatchling, and he did not know how to handle it. She was supposed to be weak, he whispered. Humans are supposed to be weak. That is what everyone believes about humans, the physician agreed. And that is why the footage is spreading so quickly, because it shows that everything we thought we knew about Earthborn humans was wrong. They leaned closer to Veth and their voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I have treated your victims for 15 cycles, Commander. I have seen the terror in their eyes and heard the screams they made when you dragged them away. And now I have seen that same terror in your eyes, and I want you to know that it brings me more satisfaction than I can possibly express. Veth tried to respond, but the physician turned and walked away, leaving him alone with his pain and his ruined leg and his shattered reputation. In the hours that followed, word of what happened continued to spread through the station like fire through dry grass. The cantina was buzzing with conversation as beings from a dozen different species discussed the incredible footage they had all seen. Did you see how fast she moved? A Taurian merchant asked his drinking companions. One moment the Keldrith had her arm, and the next moment she was destroying his leg. I heard humans come from a death world, another patron replied. A planet where the gravity is heavy and the atmosphere is corrosive, and every living thing is designed to kill every other living thing. That is ridiculous, a third voice scoffed. How could any intelligent species evolve on such a planet? And yet the footage does not lie, the first merchant pointed out. That human woman was unarmed and alone, and she crippled a Keldrith commander in less than 5 heartbeats. Similar conversations were happening all across the station, in shops and corridors and private quarters, where the footage was being watched and rewatched and analyzed. The repair shop, where Myra had bought her engine parts, was now offering her a full refund and a discount on any future purchases. The cantina, where she had eaten her meals, was preparing a free dinner in her honor. The beings who had sneered at her and ignored her and overcharged her were suddenly desperate to be seen as her friends. Not because they liked her or respected her, but because they were afraid of her. The fear spread faster than the footage, passed from one being to another through whispered warnings and nervous glances. "Do not anger the human," became the unofficial motto of Way Station Ulrich 7. "Did you see what she did to Vesserani? Imagine what she could do to you." Meanwhile, in the docking bay, where the Persistence was undergoing repairs, Mira worked alone on her damaged engine and tried to ignore the attention she was receiving. She could feel eyes watching her from every direction. She could hear the whispers that stopped whenever she looked up from her work. She knew that she had become something she never wanted to be. A symbol, a warning, a legend in the making. All she had wanted was to survive long enough to finish her repairs and continue her journey across the stars. But the galaxy had other plans. The footage of her fight with Veth was spreading faster than she could have imagined, carried by ships and communication relays to every corner of known space. Soon there would be no station, no planet, no settlement where beings did not know the name Mira-Chun and the story of what she had done to Commander Veth Serani. She had become the most famous human in the sector, and she had done it by doing exactly what her grandmother had trained her to do: survive, no matter the cost. As she worked on her engine, she thought about all the other humans scattered across the galaxy. The traders and explorers and colonists who were far from Earth and surrounded by aliens who thought they were weak and easy prey. Maybe the footage spreading across the networks would help protect them. Maybe it would make predators think twice before grabbing an Earthborn human. Or maybe it would make them targets, as aliens who wanted to test themselves against the Deathworlders came looking for fights. Myra did not know what the future would bring. She only knew that she had survived today, and tomorrow she would fly away from this station and continue her journey through a galaxy that would never look at her species the same way again. The artificial morning came to Way Station Ulrich 7 and Mira-Chun woke from a restless sleep filled with dreams of clawed hands and purple blood and the terrible sound of breaking bone. She had slept in her ship with the airlock sealed and a wrench clutched in her hand, too paranoid to close her eyes completely in case someone tried to get revenge for what she had done to Veth. But no one had come. The night had passed without incident, and now it was time to leave this cursed station behind and never look back. She checked the repairs she had completed the day before and found that everything was in working order. The new engine parts had been installed correctly, and the Persistence was ready to fly again. Mira gathered her few belongings and prepared to seal up the ship and begin the launch sequence. But before she could finish, a notification appeared on her communication panel. Someone was requesting permission to approach her ship. She hesitated for a long moment, her hand hovering over the control panel, ready to deny the request and launch immediately. But then she saw who was making the request, and her curiosity got the better of her fear. It was the Theshan physician who had treated her arm the day before. She opened a small viewing port and saw the four-armed alien, standing outside her airlock with a package tucked under one arm. "What do you want?" She called out through the external speaker. "I brought you something," the physician replied. "A gift from the beings of this station, who are grateful for what you did." Mira was suspicious, but she unlocked the outer airlock and let the physician step into the small space between the two doors. She did not let them into the ship itself, preferring to keep a sealed barrier between herself and anyone from this station. "What kind of gift?" she asked through the inner door. The physician held up the package so she could see it through the viewing port. Food supplies, medical equipment, and credits donated by dozens of station residents who wanted to thank you for crippling Veth Serani. He's been a plague on this station for 15 cycles, and you ended his reign of terror in 5 heartbeats. Myra did not know how to respond. She had not done what she did for gratitude or recognition. She had done it to survive. "I do not need thanks," she said. "I just want to leave." "I understand," the physician said. "But please, take the gift anyway. as a token of the hope you have given to the weak and the vulnerable who live in fear on stations like this one. They set the package down on the floor of the outer airlock and stepped back. There is something else you should know before you go, they added. Veth Sarani was taken off the station early this morning by a medical transport. He's being sent back to the Keldrith homeworld in disgrace, stripped of his rank and his wealth and his reputation. Good, Myra said, and she was surprised by how cold her own voice sounded. The footage of your fight has spread further than anyone expected, the physician continued. Last I checked, it had been viewed over 50 million times across the sector, and the number was still climbing. 50 million. Myra felt dizzy at the thought of so many beings watching her most terrifying moment, seeing her fear and her violence and her desperate struggle to survive. What are they saying about it? She asked despite herself. Many things, the physician replied. Some are calling you a hero who stood up against a notorious criminal. Some are calling you a monster who maimed an unarmed being with her bare hands. But most are simply afraid because they have finally seen what a human can do when cornered. The physician paused, and their voice grew thoughtful. I have heard many stories about Earth since the footage spread. Stories about the predators that roam your planet, the diseases that fill your air, the disasters that strike without warning. Is it true that your species evolved by fighting for survival against all of these threats? Mira thought about her grandmother's stories of ancient China, where tigers prowled the mountains and floods, swept away entire villages, and life was a constant struggle against forces beyond human control. Yes, she said. Earth is not an easy place to live, and humans learned to fight back against everything that tried to kill us. We hunted the predators until they feared us. We built walls against the floods. We created medicines to cure the diseases. We survived because we refused to die, no matter how hard the universe tried to kill us. The physician nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something they had suspected. Then I think the galaxy has made a terrible mistake by treating your species as weak prey, they said. I think Commander Veth Sarani will not be the last being to learn that lesson the hard way. They stepped out of the airlock and gave Myra a gesture that her translator identified as a sign of respect. Safe travels, human. May your journey be free of those who would do you harm. Myra retrieved the package from the airlock and sealed the door behind the physician. She found that the package contained everything they had promised. Enough food for 2 weeks, a complete medical kit, and a credit chip worth more than she had earned in the last 6 months. She added these supplies to her cargo hold and then returned to the cockpit to begin the launch sequence. As the Persistence lifted off from the docking bay and flew out through the station's energy barrier into the open void of space, Myra looked back at Way Station Ulrich 7 one last time. It looked so small from out here, just a tiny cluster of lights against the endless darkness. She thought about all the beings still living on that station, the predators and the prey, the hunters and the hunted. She thought about Veth Sarani being carried away in shame to a future of pain and disability. She thought about the 50 million beings who had watched her fight for her life and learned that humans were not as weak as they appeared. And she thought about her grandmother, who had taught her that the smallest warrior could defeat the largest enemy if she was brave enough and smart enough and willing to do whatever it took to survive. I did it, grandmother, she whispered to the empty cockpit. I survived. The stars stretched out before her, billions of lights scattered across the infinite darkness. Each one a sun with planets and moons and stations where beings lived and died and struggled to survive just like her. Somewhere out there, on ships and stations and worlds she would never visit, the story of what she had done was spreading like ripples in a pond. Humans were not prey. Humans were not weak. Humans were Deathworlders, survivors, fighters who had clawed their way to the top of the food chain on a planet that tried to kill them every single day. And now the galaxy knew it. Myra set her course for the nearest safe port and engaged the jump drive. The Persistence leaped forward into the stars, carrying its pilot toward whatever adventures and dangers awaited her in the vast unknown. Behind her, the legend was just beginning. The story of the Earthborn girl who had taught the galaxy to fear humanity. The story that would be told and retold for generations to come. Never grab an Earthborn, the stories would say. They grab back,